Welcome back to The Big Show. It's Alex Belfield talking to the people who are worth talking to, and for many reasons, I'm delighted to welcome Simon Callow to the programme. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. Nice to be with you.
Why can't I have a voice like yours? I've spent all these years on the radio sounding like a chain coming off a motorbike, yet it's just there, isn't it?
Well, it's something to do, I think, with spending a very great deal of my life standing on stage, in the old saying, shouting at night. You know, I think inevitably, if you do that, and I have spent most of my career on stage rather than on film, things happen. I had a good voice to start with. I can't pretend it wasn't a sort of a plus. And in my family, voices were valued very highly. My grandmother had been an opera singer, and she thought that the speaking voice was the most valuable implement that you had in your social life. She had a particularly beautiful voice, a really, really ravishing voice. So that all comes out of that, I suppose.
What were you like as a child? Were you always curious and different? Because there's a mystique about you that I find interesting.
A mystique about me? God, nobody's ever accused me of having any mystique.
I can't be the first.
You certainly are. Well, I'm very, very pleased. That's something that's come with old age. I was an incredibly noisy, incredibly energetic, incredibly emotionally volatile child, an impossible handful. And I discovered, my mother told me a few years ago, which absolutely seemed to me to be authentic, was that she'd breastfed me, I'd attacked her so savagely that I had to be put out to a wet nurse.
Is
who
that
then
true?
Immediately sent me back. Yes, my poor mother. Yes, I was just all appetite and all need. I needed attention. I needed constant intellectual stimulation. I was, oh God, can you imagine? Awful.
So were you always wanting the applause then, even as a baby?
I suppose I was, although I would like to correct an assumption. Most actors don't think about applause at all. It is the wide belief that actors sort of live for applause, and that the key moment in a play for them is the end, you know, when people put their hands together. But it's not really so. Most actors are rather embarrassed by applause as such. It's a funny thing to do, to stand on the stage and have a lot of people knock their palms together in front of you. Long may it continue.
So when you get to school then, you're this needy kid that needs attention. How did other pupils accept you or not accept you?
On the whole, I managed to get on quite well with everybody. I was never bullied, I'm delighted to say, and I was generally regarded as a rather dangerous and subversive influence. And I was, for example, a very strange incident. When I was about 5, my mother was a school secretary of a school in Goring-on-Thames, which is near Reading, and the school, it was a very eccentric and quirky school, but my education was thrown in as part of her salary. And one of the odd sidelines they had was keeping battery hens, and I was accused, publicly denounced, in fact, for opening all the doors on the battery hens' compartments, you know, and they're incredibly tightly controlled in temperature. And I professed innocence, and I continue to profess innocence, but somehow my reputation as a sort of infant criminal was established at that early point. And indeed, I remember my mother saying to me that in Africa, we lived in Africa, I was from the ages of 9 to 12, I lived in Africa, and one of the nuns had said to my mother, "Your child will either be one of the greatest geniuses the world has ever known or one of the greatest criminals." And this, me and crime, kind of was associated for a long time. And I was thrown out of my sort of creche for having a bad effect on the other children. In Africa, that was as well. It went on quite a lot like that. But then eventually I became respectable. I must have done, because I became the head boy of my school.
Do you think you're born different? I mean, somebody like you, or I look at Sir Ian McKellen, there's so few of you in that bracket of legendary actors. Let's face it, there's a lot of very good actors, but there aren't many who kind of end up in your category. Are you born that person, do you think?
I think that a lot of what is considered to be, you know, exceptional, one way or another, comes out of need. Whatever the need may be, as Ian has never made any secret of the fact that his mother's death when he was 12 kind of shattered his life, and he compensated for that in some way. And I had a curious sort of a childhood in that my father had walked out when I was 18 months old, and I had a rather tricky relationship with my mother and so on. And I certainly felt the need to impress myself on other people in one way or another. And I suppose that's the roots of that kind of thing, yes. I did have a dread of being ordinary, I admit to that. That was a sort of terror to me, was that, people would say to me, they'd look at a, drunk in the street and they'd say, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." And I'd look at someone in a bowler hat on a commuter train and point at them and say, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." I could so easily have become, well, have not stood out in any way, and I definitely wanted to stand out. I can't pretend I didn't.
So when did show business come into your life? When did you think, this is a way to get attention and be different?
I was looking for a career, as everybody does. What was I going to do? And oddly enough, it never occurred to me to be an actor. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I realised that was just about wearing wigs. And then I thought I wanted to be a diplomat, and I realised that was just about wanting canapes all the time. That was my idea of the diplomatic life. And I didn't know what the hell to do, really. I wanted to be a writer, really. That was the main thing. I wanted to be a writer, but I realised I had absolutely nothing to write about because I'd done nothing and was nobody. So
it doesn't stop Katie Price with her autobiography.
Oh, the sales of her books. She's with my publisher, and the sales of her books are what enable me to write mine.
Oh, the ironies of life.
I know. So I bless Katie Price every day I rise. But
to think she's keeping you in work.
Exactly, bless her. But no. So then I was going to the theatre a lot, and I loved the theatre deeply, deeply, and in quite an informed kind of a way. I read plays and I read books about the theatre, and then I had this great moment. It was when I went to the Old Vic at the National Theatre, then run by Sir Laurence Olivier, and I suddenly saw all these people working for the organisation, and it wasn't like other theatres, because even the people in the box office and the people who were ushers and the people who were in the book-stalls and so on seemed to be motivated by some sense of the National Theatre Company. So I wrote to Laurence Olivier a 3 foolscap page, closely typed letter explaining to him what a great organisation he was running, and he wrote back to me by return of post, as people used to in those days, and said, "Well, if you like it so much, why don't you come and work here?" So I came to work at the National Theatre in the box office. And it was then that because I had, occasionally they'd rehearse in the theatre, and I'd sneak into rehearsals, and I saw people like Peter Brook directing people like John Gielgud. I was starting at the top, as it were, in my sneaking in, and I thought, my God, this is an interesting job. It was nothing to do with applause. It was nothing to do with glamour. There was no glamour. There was certainly no applause at that point. There were people, grown men and women, wrestling with the problem of how to put on a play. And I thought, that's a very good way to spend your life. That's something I'd like to do. And so then I went to university, thinking I'd do some acting there, and then I realised that it was so terrible that I ran away from university to become an actor, and I went to drama school, which was a wonderful thing to do. It was a wonderful drama school called the Drama Centre, and then I realised I'd found my vocation.
I don't want to get too arty-farty about being an actor, but I've asked Sir Ian McKellen this in the past, and I honestly think it's more a game of being a personality and us believing in you as much as your characters. How much do you think your sense of humour has affected your acting? Because you are fundamentally a funny man.
Well, I laugh a lot, that's certainly true. And yes, I've always loved making people laugh. That has always, all my life, yes, I was a sort of comedian as a child. But it's hard for me to imagine playing a character without humour, either without be consciously or unconsciously funny in some way or another. And I think humour is one of the great, great ways in which we understand the world. And so I would never... I don't think I could. It is part of my makeup, as you suggest, to think of things in that sort of a comic way. But you made a very interesting point about whether it's me or the character. And the interesting thing about the theatre is that it's a halfway point. It's a meeting between me and the character, and me and the author, as it were, and the author's vision of the character. And I have to find it in me, but I also have to find the character the great point comes, as I've often said, when it's not me playing the character, but the character playing me. And that's an amazing moment for an actor. You suddenly start to behave in ways that you didn't know anything about, because you've got hold of the principle of the character, and you start to become Richard III, and God save everybody from you at that point.
Yeah. One thing I really want to talk to you about is you being so open about your sexuality. I was watching Jonathan Ross recently, and he had a guy called Adam Lambert on, who was the star of American Idol.
Oh, yes.
And he said that he thinks he was voted off and they didn't want him on the programme because he was gay. And I thought, isn't that incredible in 2010 that American TV, and possibly even British TV, still has those problems and hang-ups about something that you were dealing with 100 years ago? Is it still of a surprise to you that this is an issue?
No, to be honest, it's a surprise to me that we've come as far as we have so quickly. Because when I was growing up as a boy, it seemed that it was totally entrenched, that every single institution or organisation in the country was against the idea of gay men being open and openly following their loving impulses. And it changed and changed and changed more quickly than anybody who introduced that legislation ever thought it could. And I do think we're closely reaching a point in Britain, certainly, where it is ceasing to be an issue. It isn't. We understand that, especially Stonewall and so on have drawn a lot of attention lately to the question of bullying of gay kids in schools, and that is an endemic thing. But in the end, I'm afraid prejudice is with us at the core of human nature. We'll always be struggling with that. The main and important issue is that the law has changed so that we are all protected alike. And that's the absolutely critical thing.
Does it bother you that so many actors won't come out? So many really famous guys that we all watch time and time again cannot come out because they think their career will be over if they do?
It is extraordinary. I agree with you absolutely. I think that what has happened in Hollywood, as a sort of sideline to that question, is that a lot of young actors who are openly gay in the theatre in America know that they would not have a chance in Hollywood, so they just don't go there. Right. I think that, and that is a terrible thing, of course. That's an absolutely awful thing. That's prejudice in a sort of negative way rather than an active way. I mean, all we can hope is that we will continue to consolidate all the progress that has been made. But again, I repeat, America is a little bit strange because there are sort of fundamentalist areas of America. The phenomenon like Sarah Palin is just kind of to remind us all that we thought we knew America before we didn't.
Are you of the belief that if you go and pay your ticket, you have the right to see anything you want to see?
Yes. Well, let me just try to consider that again. Well, so if there was a film which advocated the killing of Jews, would I go to see it? No. Do I think it should be made? No. I don't. I think if films that advocate violence and aggression towards any section of the community are illegitimate and should not be allowed. If I think that the question of whether people's dignity has been offended, then I think it's an entirely different question. And I think there's a weirdly large amount of standing on people's dignity at the moment, a lot of huffing and puffing about it. I'm really deliriously happy to see gay people sent up. If, on the other hand, a film proposes that gay people should be herded together and put into concentration camps and killed, then, of course, I think it's violently wrong. But I do think that in the area of dignity and respect and all of that, we have to be as open as we possibly can be. Fear is always the enemy of everything. Fear has nothing to be said for it at all.
That was always Mel Brooks's argument with the producers, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, there you are. I mean, there's a sublime example of it. A show, I may say, enjoyed certainly on Broadway and as a movie by a massively, predominantly Jewish audience in New York theatre who just screamed with laughter from beginning to end.
Just dawned on me, Simon, if you're doing programmes like The One Show, why are you wasting your time talking to me? It's extraordinary.
You know, I try to keep in touch with even the lowliest member of our community. I like to reach out.
There's a new Shakespeare play, apparently.
Yeah, there is.
And you're going to be in it.
I am.
What's that then?
Nobody else either, just me. It's called The Man from Stratford, which gives you a pretty clear idea of how I feel about the controversy over who wrote the plays of William Shakespeare. I'm taking the rather radical line that the plays of William Shakespeare were written by William Shakespeare. And it's an attempt to kind of get into the old boy's brain and to figure out how he became the man, the writer that he was, and what his world was, and what sort of an emotional landscape he had, and to celebrate, really, the fact that this extraordinary writer who lived over 450 years ago still has said the most fresh, pertinent, and heartbreaking things about what it is to be a human being.
The more it is material you perform and read and see and enjoy, are you learning something every day?
I am. It's quite extraordinary. Quite amazing. And actually things that you think you know already about Shakespeare, you just stop and ponder it for a bit. For example, Shakespeare was the first surviving son of his parents. His mother had lost 2 children before that. Now, it's a sort of a fact, you know, the same would be true of many, many people. But if you apply that to the idea of an imaginative child is aware that his mother's grieving. What would he do to cheer her up, to bring her out of it? Tell her stories, wouldn't he? And it seems to me that that's just a really human detail about that man. We claim that we don't know anything about him, but we know a great deal about him.
And your new autobiography is out. It's called My Life in Pieces.
Correct, yes.
What's that about then?
It's about me. All about me. Isn't that marvellous? Lucky you. No, the thing is, it's really about me and the theatre. And my life in the theatre. But it's about half the book is made up of pieces. That's why it's called My Life in Pieces, that I've written for newspapers over the last 30 years. It's really traces it's about my deep love, passion for the theatre, and how the very first play I ever saw, the very first plays I ever did, the actors that I met, the directors that I worked with, and all the rest of it. It's a sort of complete, comprehensive account of everything I've ever done in the theatre or with actors or with acting.
It's been a great thrill to talk to you, and I'd love to go for a beer with you sometime. The stories and the people you've met. All right, a glass of wine. What would we get if we went to the pub then, or do we not even go to a pub?
I hope no publican will take offence at this, but wine in pubs is not probably
they don't go together very well, do they?
Best thing to drink. Yes,
I don't really like warm white wine. It's
yeah, but I'll have a double malt whiskey with you.
Pork scratchings?
Any day you like, of course.
All right, okay. Thanks for coming on the programme. By the way, how many times are you booked these days as Simon Cowell, and people are disappointed?
No, the sad thing is that I'm not getting Simon Cowell's checks. That day will come, I hope.
But at least you don't have to wake up in the morning and realise you're Simon Cowell.
Yeah, well, that is true.
Real honour talking to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Bye-bye.